I am an African.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Africa for Dummies, hosted as always by me, Nathan, and Zenge.
Hello, everybody. My name is Zenge, as usual, and we today are gonna take a turn into the business sector and particularly the aviation sector. This is the second episode of the Doing Business in Africa season. As you remember, the first episode was on entrepreneurship and innovation and all those things. Today, we have a very special guest. He has featured on several platforms, particularly in South Africa and beyond the borders, talking about aviation and the developments across the aviation sector. We have Mr. Puthego Mojapele. I think that's the South African pronunciation. Yeah, so he's an
Nah,
aviation.
you definitely butchered it. That doesn't
I
sound right.
didn't butcher it. It's
That doesn't
Puthego
sound right.
Mojapele. Yeah, yeah, that's a
Yeah,
correct pronunciation. This is, my ancestors are from South Africa. So
yeah.
aviation, he's an aviation expert, he's an aviation consultant, he's an analyst, and he's also got his own aviation structure. I don't want to go too much into details about that. I think he'll be able to explain it. So welcome to the episode, Mr. Mojapele.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for having me this afternoon.
Yeah, so we basically want to talk about several things in the aviation sector that have happened in the last 10 years. So we're gonna start with infrastructure. For those that travel across Africa or any country in Africa, they would have noticed some changes, very drastic changes in infrastructure. So for example, in Lusaka, if you flew in Lusaka 10 years ago and you flew in now, you see
Oh, there's a
this
huge difference. It's a
massive,
huge.
massive.
Oh my God,
Yeah, there's the old
crazy
terminal from 1965, and there's this $360 million glass, terminal.
structure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and apparently this is happening across the continent. There's in Dar es Salaam, the Julius Nyerere Airport, massive new
Mm.
terminal, increasing capacity. Jomo Kenyatta Airport in Nairobi. There was also an expansion of one of their terminals in 2015. In Entebbe Airport, there's also expansion going on there. That's in Uganda, in Harare as well, in Ghana as well. It was completed 2018.
Hmm.
Senegal as well. So in the last 10 years, why are we seeing all of
And, and
this
and in Addis as well, in
in
Bola
Addis Ababa as
International.
well?
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So why, with the damage that was seen with COVID-19 and how flying has sort of came to a halt at that time, do you think this investment in infrastructure is a bit worthless, or is there something behind it? Why is all of this infrastructure happening?
Well, thank you very much. I think one should start by acknowledging the efforts of these countries that you have just mentioned, that they took an initiative of improving infrastructure of an aviation in their own backyards, and that should be commended to those governments that have taken an initiative of creating a conducive environment for all the aviation companies that would want to utilize the facility. Because see, when you improve infrastructure in your country, it doesn't necessarily mean that you as a country you are going to utilize it. You are inviting more investors to come through to invest in your country. I mean, if you're talking about countries that have more minerals, particularly in the likes of Zambia.
Yeah.
Zambia, we know it's a home of copper. There's a copper belt over there, so there's so many people that would want to fly to Zambia, and from different destinations. And I think the investment is worthwhile. When you look at the cargo movement, Africa has been very much far apart from each other. I mean, a couple of years ago, I actually wanted to go to Uh, if you just go to north of Africa, just north of Africa, you have to go to London first. If you want
Go
to
to
go to
London, you have to go out of Africa to come back.
out of Africa, go to London first, and then come back into Africa. I mean, how stupid is that?
Mm.
Now, Africa has been very much apart from each other. It's not united as far as aviation is concerned. Now, if I may take you back to your Masuku agreement, I'm sure
Super.
you're very much familiar with the Masuku agreement, where we discussed the open sky policy, where the airlines had to come together within African continent and become one and be able to trade among their own countries. If I want to fly out of Ndola and to go to another destination within African continent as a registered South African company, I should be able to do that.
Yeah.
So Yamoussoukro agreement was particularly addressing that. But this took long, if I may say. This took very much long time to be realized. That's why you see the Ghana started leading the everything, opening
Yeah.
up. When Ghana started renovating their airport,
Yeah.
they said to South African Airways, you have the rights to fly anywhere you want from Accra. We're giving you those rights. South Africa, as we know, they don't have a vision that many other people would have. They just did not take that advantage. They continue to operate out of Ghana to go to Washington, D.C. and Johannesburg. And the only reason why they did that was purely a technical stop for South African Airways to refuel there and pick up some passengers and move on to DC. But when you look at the commercial side of it, as to how they could have utilized that opportunity, it is really something that one would have said they should have jumped into the opportunity. And then you move on to Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta International. Jomo Kenyatta International, we know there was a lot of terrorists that were happening
Some
there.
sort of fire or something like that caused by
Yes, there was, the Al Shabaab thing. Actually, the Al Shabaab thing was the one that prompted them to beef up the upgrades and so on, because there was a couple of attacks that happened in that airport, if you were to remember. I'm a little bit taking you backwards. I might not probably, but the history, it's important that we bring into this context so that our listeners and everybody can understand where we're coming from. So it was after those attacks that happened in that in Kenya, in Nairobi. However, Kenyan Airways has always been strong, I must say. They've always been strong. They've always been striving for improving the connectivity within the East African part of Africa. I mean, they were really championing this. And the last straw was when they were granted the opportunity to fly into JFK. And I think in that way, they were ready when they were granted that. They were not, that granting did not just come through. They worked hard to end that. So the investment, to be honest with you, it's worth a while. And I think it is something that we shouldn't look at it whether the country has an airline or it doesn't have an airline, whether they operate in small scale, or we should look at it as a connection point of uniting Africa as far as aviation is concerned.
Some of these airports, for example, they've had I guess, I don't know, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but some of them have been, I think most people or most of the citizens, I'll give an example of my country. Some of these expansions have been looked at as a wastage of money from the citizens' perspective, and maybe a way to funnel money, uh, like through corruption and things like that. So I would say, if even with those factors in place, of it tends to be a lot of funny play in terms of investment, and I mean, state funds in terms of African governments and things like that, would you still say that the ROI is still like worth that investment? Does it always equal expansion in because some of these cities that we mentioned are like they're big destinations. You talk about Dar es Salaam, you talk about Nairobi. These are big country, these are big states. These are important destinations. I'm not saying other places are not as important, but they're frequently like people frequently travel there. So my question would be, does it mean that even a small country that doesn't get as many visitors, is it worth that investment to say, okay, let's just beef up our airport? Does it always equal more investment?
It is important that we contextualize the upgrades. Why do you need to upgrade? May I just bring this to your attention that majority of the destinations in Africa, they are not in compliance with the international airline or international ICAO, to be honest with you.
Really?
They are not.
Really?
The majority of them, they are not. So no airline is going to want to fly into places that is not in compliance with the ICAO. There's certainly no way that they are going to do that. Now, that's why in the past, I think it's about 2-3 weeks ago, there was another ICAO conference that happened was happening in Kigali. It was addressed by Honorable President Paul Kagame. Yes. Sorry, my apologies to my fellow Africans. He's one man who really said it all on that meeting. So the people needs to understand, population needs to understand that when you invest in something that you don't have a skill on, it doesn't necessarily translate on the fact that because you don't have a skill in that, therefore, is not going to be beneficial to you. It might not look like it's not going to be beneficial to you because you don't have an understanding and a skill on that. But in terms of the compliance, where we would say we want Delta Airlines to come and fly directly from wherever they come from in the United States to Dar es Salaam and bring them there. Now, when Delta comes in to do the audit, which is something that I do, by the way, I do a lot of audit in lots of airports so that we can assist the airlines that wants to fly in certain areas and give them the feedback. When we give them the feedback, the audit that we do on the ground, it is ICAO compliant. And when it's ICAO compliant, then we know for the fact that it is safe.
For those that aren't conversant, it's ICAO is the International Civil Aviation Organization.
Yes.
So yeah, it's the main regulating international body for aviation.
Correct. Yes. Thank you so much. I sometimes forget to explain things because my apologies once there. Now with us saying that is we would then invite people to come and fly in our areas. Two things happen when you invite an airline to come and fly to your country. Two things happens here. One is that you do have the direct connectivity if you want to have connectivity to any destination when you invite an airline to come and fly there. One. Two is that you are increasing capacity of the cargo, not that comes in your country, that leaves your country to go somewhere. Meaning that Joe Mike in some certain area where he produces something that is needed, flowers, and we know Africa is very rich with natural resources. We have so many things that we can export to European market, American market, and the Western market. Now, when we do that investment, we are unlocking that, meaning that Joe Mike from a certain area would be then able to access the European market, access the American market by this connectivity. Not only that, even in Africa, some African countries, you can still send. I mean, there are countries that specialize with coffee. African coffee, it's something that everybody around the world drinks. I'm as a pilot myself from all the countries that I've been flying to and whatever, I've always been drinking coffee to keep me awake, especially when you do what we call red eye, when I was in America, I used to do quite a lot of red eyes from west to east coast, and all the pilots will tell you that it's not an easy one. So we would drink the African coffee in America. Now that coffee, those in airport infrastructure are the ones that we need to be able to take that coffee that get brewed, that gets planted in Africa and be sold in an American market or anywhere else in the world. So people need to understand that. Yes, corruption is a concern for everybody. We know corruption exists, but at the same time, this thing of being alarmed about anything that happens and we just become crazy and say it is corruption. We should sometimes put a stop and say, but hang on, let's look at what is it that this investment is tend to bring in our countries. And I think in that context, we would then be able to see the results of why we have to invest so much money into that. Yes, so people might not have houses, might not have water, they might not have this and that. But at the same time, for us to be able to maneuver our own ways, we need to access the international markets. How do we access the international market? By having a connectivity that is easy for everybody in the market to be able to tap into that and be able to send the stuff, and you get dollars, and we use that money that we get out of that to further develop our countries.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point that you have put there. Many people just sort of see airports as sort of the passenger experience and that nice sort of, walking through the newly refurbished. They don't consider the export factor, which I think would also be important for the Continental Free Trade Agreement. But now we want to talk about the developments in airlines. So Africa is used to big giants like South African Airways, Kenya Airways. These, sort of household names when it comes to aviation have faced very turbulent skies, if you like. South African Airways has had,
pun intended.
Pun intended. So South African Airways has been bailed out several times. I think they were bankrupt around COVID or just after COVID, but they're somewhat back now. Kenya Airways has also had several losses. Now the comparatively new ones, like Rwanda Air, which used to be called Rwanda Express, and Air Tanzania, Ugandan Airlines, these used to be state-owned airlines, the traditional type of state-owned airlines, but they're seeing a massive revival, a massive reboot, new planes worth hundreds of millions of US dollars. So essentially, are we seeing this sort of return? So East Africa has Ugandan Airlines, Air Tanzania, Rwanda Air, Kenya Airways. All of these are now like massive airlines with long-haul capabilities with their new purchases. So now are we basically seeing a return of national airlines? Even Air Senegal, I think I also heard.
Yes, Senegal, they are now flying to Washington as well as JFK.
Yeah. So basically, are we seeing a return of national airlines? Because there was a time that people sort of felt that, national airlines, first of all, as we mentioned before, corruption, they had a bad reputation for time. There used to be jokes about how people would put goats on the plane and, terrible reputation. Government officials would go on for free, very poor standards, very late. So what has changed now? What's telling people, telling governments that no, we should start a national airline or revive the national airline?
Firstly, let me start with South African Airways. I think it is important because that's where I come from. I'm very much familiar with the happenings in South Africa. I'm very much clued up with that. South African Airways was always considered as the best airline in Africa and the entire African continent and the world, by the way. It has always been considered as such. And, so what then happened was that there was a change of management, a change of the departments, a change of basically everything at South African Airways. And I'm now taking you a couple of years back before we get to 2019, 2020, early 2020, when they decided to apply for business rescue. Now, there was a couple of wrong decisions that were taken at South African Airways. And those wrong decisions that were taken was precisely because they had thought that, the airline would then be able to be considered. They ride on the reputation of the airline, but not business sense. I don't know if I'm making sense here.
So like the prestige rather than the
They looked at the
prices and
prestige.
the logic, yeah.
Absolutely. They looked at that and they thought, well, we've got the reputation, we've got the numbers, we've got a Voyager program that has millions of subscribers. And they just looked at it that way. They went and take wrong decisions where they then sold all the assets that they had in a form of airplanes that they outrightly owned. They sold all of them. They went, and there was a gentleman by the name of the name has just gone. Anyway, that CEO, I'll remember the name just now. That CEO, he then decided to sell all our planes. The board of SAA at the time, it was under the leadership of Transnet at the time. They sold everything that we own, everything. They even sold some buildings that SAA owned, literally, and then they went and leased. That's when the problem of SAA started. They went out on the market, get the same number of fleet that they had, that they sold, lease them.
Wow.
Now, tell me, you owning the car, you driving it, you outrightly owning. You don't owe a cent on it. You sell it, and then you go and rent. You go to Avis and rent, and you drive, and you think that you're going to make money. That's where the problem came from.
So everything
it's a pure
goes
corruption
into sustaining the lease agreements that you've had.
Well, there was no way. Remember, the number gets dwindled. And remember, South Africa is open for everybody. If you were alone flying to London out of South Africa, Johannesburg, having 3 services out of South Africa, 1 in Cape Town, 2 in Johannesburg,
right.
And later on, you have 2 airlines deciding to fly to South Africa coming from London. Virgin Atlantic, 2 services, Cape Town, Johannesburg, 2 services, 3 services from BA. Out of Heathrow, 1 in Cape Town.
Yeah.
Do you think you're going to make money? There's no way. There's definitely no way. People are going to choose these other options that are there. Yet you don't own even 1 single aircraft, and you want to compete in that. So systematically, the board of the directors that have been appointed in these entities are politically. It's got nothing to do with experience and expertise that you have in relation to the aviation. They would then pick up a comrade, they will take a political appointee, bringing him to come and run the airline, bringing him to come and be a board chairperson, a board member, and sign wrong things to come into business.
So there was a lack of expertise then in the highest parts of the company.
Because you are not politically connected. That's as simple as that. I'm sitting here as an aviator myself, as a person who has worked with international airlines, but I'm not sitting in 1 single board of South African anywhere in aviation. I'm not sitting there. Yeah. And the reason why I'm not sitting there is not because I don't apply, and I don't even want to apply for that matter. And the reason why I don't want to apply is because I don't want a situation where, I should be given opportunity with trust that I can change things for the better. Right. Not that somebody's doing me a favor to be there. That I would not appreciate, and I don't want, because I have earned every little thing that I have now by working hard and showing that I can do that. So South African Airways' demise was purely political, and it was intentional. And I think we won't see it anytime soon continuing. I think the 6 or 9 aircrafts that they own at the moment, they'll continue to drop. And eventually we won't have an airline that's called South African Airways. Even though they say they have signed an agreement to sell 51% stake with a an entity called Takatso, which is now being challenged at court. It was a scrupulous dealing that happened, and even now, as we speak, the Air Licensing Council has now questioned the deal, that there's no way that they can have 51% because the licensing condition doesn't allow that to happen. It is something that happened over the weekend. There was a letter that the Air Licensing Council issued to the South African Airways for them to come through to account for that deal. So South African Airways, I don't think we are going to see any change in it at the moment. And it's said that some of these big entities are now going to be going down this way because of lack of management and having people that are capable of running these entities profitably and professionally. Moving to Kenya, Kenya had an opportunity to work within the cycles of Ethiopia. You see, Kenya is positioned at the east, 7 hours to Europe or 6 hours to Europe, and 4 hours out of 3 hours out of other places. For example, Lusaka, Johannesburg, and other places.
It's quite strategically positioned.
Yeah.
Yes, and when you go to China as well, they are really very much close to China as compared to South Africa and any other place, going towards the east. When you go to Dubai out of Kenya, or you only spending good 3.5 hours, you are already in Dubai. They were strategically positioned. I have no idea what happened to them. I don't have any idea. They had a great plan. They are strategically positioned, and they would be able to turn the things around better in the manner in which they have done it. When they introduced the flights to the likes of Guangzhou, when they introduced the flights to the likes of what's the name? Shanghai, the likes of Shanghai, because that's where the most of the people that does business in Africa would want to go. Many people that come from
the like.
Yes, yeah. They would want to go to China. They would want to go to anywhere else. But they missed an opportunity of capitalizing on that, particularly when you look at the Southern Africa part of Lusaka, Johannesburg, Harare, and you name them, all those places. That's where they could have capitalized on. But they failed to do that. But the reason why they failed to do that was just not, they just could not see Ethiopian airline rising the manner in which it has risen. They have taken the market with storm, these guys. But we should really congratulate them for doing that. But at the same time, we need to look at what really causes these airlines to be on the ground as they are at the moment.
Okay, so that was part 1 of our Africa for Dummies Looking to the Skies episode. I hope you guys are learning as much as I am, because I did not know half of the things. If you notice, I'm not even speaking in this episode. That's because I'm just taking most of it in. I did not know some of the complexities that exist in African aviation. We just always, complain like why is flying in Africa so expensive, but there are all these issues. So if you want to continue learning about this, there's a second part that should be uploaded right now. As always, thank you so much for rocking with Dummies.